Dad?
What if the creature your whole town feared was the one who kept your daughter warm until her final breath? For nearly 2 decades, Raymond Keaton hunted through the forests of Pine Hollow, fueled by rage, believing a monstrous Bigfoot had taken his 7-year-old daughter Lacey. All they ever found was a torn piece of cloth and footprints too big to be human. But in 1992, everything changed. A young ecology student, Hannah, fell into a ravine. Leg broken, radio shattered, winter setting in. She should have died out there. But someone came. Not a man, not a wolf. A massive, gray-brown Bigfoot mother. She laid down beside Hannah, shared her body heat, and saved her. That Bigfoot was Marlow. And 18 years earlier, she had done the same for little Lacey. Lacey's final words, found in a sealed forest journal, revealed the truth. I wasn't alone. She kept me safe. She tried to help. Bigfoot wasn't the monster. The real monster was a poacher. The man who lied to Ray and turned grief into hatred. This story isn't just about Bigfoot. It's about how kindness survives, even in the darkest winters, and how the one we fear the most might be the one who saves us. But now I want to know something from you. Where in the world are you watching from right now? And what's your name, dear friend? Because stories like this, they deserve to be shared. So if this touched you, leave a like, hit subscribe, and help us build a community that believes in misunderstood magic, the kind that hides in the woods, waiting for the right moment to come back. To you, wherever you are, thank you for being here. And remember, kindness always returns. Spring arrived late that year in Pine Hollow. The trees had begun to leaf out, but patches of old snow still clung to the shadows beneath the pines like forgotten regrets. The mountain air was wet with thaw and memory, and the wind carried the kind of chill that made a man pull his coat tighter, not just for warmth, but for comfort. Raymond Keaton stood at the edge of the tree line, staring out across the meadow that curved into the forest like a sleeping animal's back. The same clearing he'd come to every spring since 1974. 18 years. That number had started to rot somewhere behind his ribs. The woodpile outside his cabin was stacked with obsessive precision. The sawdust on his jeans never quite brushed away. In town, they still whispered about him. That poor man who never let it go. That broken soul who thought monsters stole his daughter. But Ray knew what he'd seen. Lacey had been 7, missing front teeth, hair the color of corn silk. She'd been chasing butterflies while he grilled hot dogs. Just a picnic. Just a sunny Saturday by Coldwater Creek. Then, the scream. Then nothing but a footprint the size of a dinner plate in the mud. And silence, like the forest had swallowed the world. People said it was a bear, or a cougar, or a lie. But he knew. He'd spent years chasing rumors and broken trails, building traps and cameras in the dark, sketching blurry silhouettes into the margins of his grief. And through it all, one voice kept feeding the fire. Victor Lorne. The door to the bar swung open with a hard creak, and the air shifted as Victor walked in, smelling like wet fur and cheap leather. 60, maybe more, face carved from rough stone. He made his way to Ray's booth like a man who thought the whole town owed him something. Heard something last night, Victor said, sliding into the seat across from him. Down by Flat Rock Hollow. Another goat gone. 3rd this month. Ray didn't answer. His hands were wrapped tight around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Tracks too, Victor went on. Big ones. You know what I'm saying? Ray met his eyes, slow and tired. And you're sure it's not another dog? Victor leaned in. You think dogs make off with livestock without leaving blood or bone? You know better. Ray's silence was answer enough. Victor smirked. We could go tonight, like old times. Outside, the clouds thickened, and the sun began to fall behind the mountain ridge. Ray nodded once, barely perceptible, like he wasn't agreeing so much as surrendering. But in another part of town, someone entirely different had just arrived. Hannah Reeves stepped out of the bus with a notebook clutched to her chest and a backpack slung across one shoulder. 22, fresh-faced, with eyes that lingered too long on trees and streams. A grad student with a heart full of questions and a mind full of forests. She came for a biodiversity survey, not for ghosts. The ranger station smelled like dust and pine. She met with the district officer, got a map, a warning about weather, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No promises on what you'll find," he said. "Spring's been late, but you're welcome to try." She set out the next morning, her boots cutting through soft mud, her breath visible in the high-altitude air. She loved this kind of quiet, the kind that hummed just below silence. But halfway through the second day, something shifted. It started with the flattened grass. A perfect spiral, wide as a truck, pressed down like something large had curled there. Not violently, gently, the way a mother deer would bed down with her fawn. She knelt, fingertips grazing the cold stems. No scorch, no broken stalks. Just weight. Intentional. Something had rested here. She stood up and scanned the trees. Further down, where the ridge dropped into the tree line, Ray was tracking something else entirely. Fresh tracks. Deep. 2 sets. One large, one small. He crouched and touched the edge of a heel print the length of his forearm. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They had families. The thought crashed into him like a winter storm. For all these years he had imagined a lone beast, feral, monstrous, solitary. But these tracks, they told a different story. Dusk slid its fingers through the branches. Ray moved quietly through the underbrush, his rifle slung low. Every sense sharpened, every footstep careful. Then he saw it, a silhouette, tall, impossibly broad, half hidden behind a rock outcrop. The air changed. No birds, no breeze. Ray raised his rifle, finger just behind the trigger. The figure didn't move. Then he saw it. Behind the figure, something small, hunched, hiding. The tall one wasn't running. It was shielding. Ray's breath hitched. The wind carried something strange, like a groan wrapped in mourning. Not a growl, not a threat. A plea. And then, from the rocks, a sound that cut straight through his spine. A child's voice. High, trembling, not quite words. A whimper. Ray's finger fell away from the trigger. His arms dropped. The forest stood still. He took one step forward. The figure didn't flinch, just stood there, an unmoving wall of fur and flesh, between him and whatever it was protecting. Ray stepped again, the rifle slung back. When he reached the edge of the clearing, they were gone. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of cedar and something older. He walked to where the tall figure had stood. The ground was soft. Mud slicked under his boots. Then he saw it, gouges in the earth. 4 deep marks, like massive fingers clawed into the dirt. Not in rage, but in fear. Like something holding on, like something afraid to lose again. Ray fell to his knees, hand hovering just above the grooves. He didn't know what scared him more. That they were still out there, or that they weren't monsters at all. Back at her rented cabin, Hannah wrote notes by lantern light. She couldn't sleep. Her fingers trembled as she traced the spiral shape from memory. She'd seen dens before. This wasn't that. This was something else. She thought about the silence, the way the wind had paused, and that strange feeling in her gut, like she wasn't alone, not in the threatening way, but the watching kind. She rubbed her arms and shut the notebook. Outside, the wind shifted again, and deep in the woods, something breathed. Ray didn't tell anyone what he saw. He knew better. But the next morning, he woke up with mud still under his nails. And for the first time in 18 years, he didn't dream of Lacey screaming. He dreamt of something tall, something still, standing between a child and the dark. And that sound, that impossible aching sound that shouldn't exist. Not in this world, but it did. And the mountain, as always, kept its secrets. The morning started clear, sunlight slipping through the pine needles like threads of gold. Hannah's boots pressed into the soft moss, damp from last night's melt. She had her map rolled up in one pocket, her canteen clipped to her hip, and her thoughts floating somewhere between focus and wonder. The deeper she went, the more the forest stopped sounding like a place and started breathing like a memory. Bird song came in cautious flutters. The wind shifted quiet. Her compass stayed steady, but something in her chest tilted. She reached a ridge marked on the map as unnoted. A no-name place, just contour lines and elevation. But the soil beneath her boots had thinned, the slope underfoot losing shape. She crouched to get a better look at the ferns curling beneath a fallen branch. The earth gave way before she could move. The sound was sudden, less of a crack, more like a sigh from something old finally letting go. She fell hard. Branches whipped past her face as she tumbled. Her backpack snagged. She slipped free. Her shoulder hit first, then her hip, then the rest of her body slid down an earthen chute, slick with thaw. The world spun until it didn't, and she landed in a cold, shaded bowl of stone and root. The ravine was deeper than it looked. Steep walls, no clean ledges, at least 30 feet. She couldn't move at first. Everything buzzed. Then pain flared through her right leg. White-hot, sharp, unignorable. She tried to sit. Couldn't. Her thigh burned. The angle was wrong. Broken. Her hands fumbled toward her waist, searching for her radio. Cracked. Dead. The antenna hung bent like a wilted stalk. She cursed under her breath. A bird flew overhead, but she couldn't see it. Only its shadow drifting along the ravine wall like a passing thought. By late afternoon, the warmth faded. Her breath came in clouds. She tightened her jacket. Her fingers were starting to go numb, her lips dry. The backpack had landed 10 feet away, up on a rock, out of reach. Her water, her food, her emergency kit. She shouted once. It echoed, then silence again. A sound came an hour later, not from above, but from below. At first, it was just the brush shifting, then something slow and heavy moving down the slope. She froze. Her body said panic, but her mind whispered no use. She couldn't run, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. Whatever it was coming. The figure appeared from the shadow just beyond the deadfall. A large shape, upright, massive, not charging, not crouching, but climbing. Climbing down with a kind of grace that didn't match its size. Its fur was thick and dark, not black, more like burnt mahogany with gray streaks near the shoulders. It moved on 2 legs but used its arms when needed, long fingers gripping stone like a rock climber would. And its face wasn't a face she'd ever seen before. Not an ape, not a bear. Something else. Something that looked at her and didn't blink. She didn't scream. Her heart screamed for her. The creature paused a few feet away. The two of them sat in that breathless space between threat and awe. Then it did something she didn't expect. It sat down. Not facing her, beside her. Slowly, as if not to startle her more. The weight of its body shifted the earth. Its arm brushed against hers. Warmth bled from its side like a radiator in the snow. It exhaled. Deep, steady, anchoring. Hannah's teeth were chattering, but her breath started to match that rhythm. The light faded completely. The air dropped. She didn't know if it was hours or just minutes. But at some point her head leaned against something solid. It was breathing. She was breathing. Her hands curled into fur. When she opened her eyes again, the creature hadn't moved. Then came the rustle. Another shape appeared, much smaller. Curious steps. Lighter, unsure. She turned her head and met the eyes of something young. It tilted its head the way children do when they're not sure if they're safe. The fur on this one was lighter, chestnut and gold. The face had more roundness. Eyes bigger. Still no whites, just deep amber, like sunlight filtered through resin. It carried something: dry pine needles, twisted moss, bits of leaves. The little one came closer, reached out, and gently placed the forest debris over Hannah's body. Her legs, her chest, her hands, tucking, the way someone might tuck in a doll or a sibling. She blinked fast. Tears stung her eyes, not from fear, from something else. The little one moved closer and sniffed her face, then her hair. Its nose brushed her cheek. She didn't flinch. Then the larger one, the mother it had to be, shifted slightly, pressing closer to her side, never touching her injured leg, only offering heat. Her hands trembled as she reached up to touch her shoulder. The creature didn't move. Its breathing stayed slow, but she felt the scar. A thick raised line running from collarbone to blade, old and brutal. Hannah's breath caught. She had read about this. A fragment of a report, buried deep in an old university archive. An anonymous account from 1974. A child had gone missing in these very woods. Never found, but there had been rumors. A witness had claimed to see something with eyes like amber and a deep shoulder wound, crossing the ridge days later. The date was burned into her mind, because it was the same year her mother had died, and the year this forest had earned its silence. Night settled fully now. The stars blinked overhead, distant and cold. The wind rolled through the treetops above like a restless choir. Down in the ravine she began to cry, soft, silent, not because she was scared now, but because she wasn't. And that confused her more than anything else. Her body hurt, her leg throbbed, her face ached from the cold. But something inside her, something she hadn't known was broken, was being held in place by creatures the world refused to believe in. And they didn't ask for anything in return. She didn't sleep much, but she rested, just enough. When she closed her eyes again, she could still feel the little one's fingers, clumsy, kind, patting her arm like a child might pat a stuffed animal before falling asleep. And just before the dawn reached the tips of the trees above, she realized something had changed. Not outside, inside her. Because no matter what happened next, she would never again believe the forest was empty. And far above, on the ridge line where the wind bit sharper and the trees thinned into sky, something else stirred. A man stood with binoculars slung around his neck and a rifle in his truck. He didn't know what he was about to lose. But the mountain did. And the mountain, as always, remembered. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet when Ray set out, but the world was already shifting. The forest held that strange hush it sometimes did before things were found. The kind of quiet that pressed in around your ears and made your thoughts feel louder than they should. There was a smear of pink across the clouds and frost on the dry leaves. Ray's boots cracked softly over the underbrush. His breath hung in front of him like smoke. He hadn't slept. All night the sound haunted him. That voice, small, high-pitched, fragile. Not a wild cry, not animal panic. A child's voice, in the wrong part of the woods, at the wrong time, wrapped in the wrong kind of silence. He knew better than to believe in coincidence anymore. He followed the trail the way an old man follows ghosts. It didn't take long to find the scarf. A maroon knit, soft to the touch, snagged on a branch near the edge of a ravine. He stepped closer, jaw tightening as he saw the initials stitched into the hem. HR. He knelt, fingers brushing the fabric like it was made of smoke. Then he saw the rest. Boot prints, partial, a streak in the mud. Something had slid, hard. At the rim of the ravine, he saw where the earth had given way. He lay flat, stomach to soil, and peered over the edge. 30 feet down, sunlight hadn't yet reached the bottom, but there was a shadow, a shape. It didn't move. His chest pulled tight. He scanned the area. No sign of dogs, no other tracks. Just a piece of canvas half buried in pine needles nearby. A trail satchel. It must have flung loose during the fall. He reached down and picked it up. The buckle was twisted, and the side pocket hung open. Inside, past a tangle of crushed protein bars and a cracked flashlight, something small was wedged between two Ziploc bags. A notebook, old, yellowed at the corners. The kind you'd find in a school backpack in the 70s. Duct tape across the spine, faded letters on the front. Lacey Keaton, 1974. Ray's breath left him. The world tilted. His fingers trembled as he opened the first page. The ink had bled from moisture, but the words were still there. Jagged, childlike, familiar. They came for me, but not to hurt me. She was big. She had eyes like honey. He dropped to his knees right there in the mud. The pages turned slowly, each line written in looping letters too big for the lines, each word carrying a pulse of something long buried. It wasn't a diary. It was a message in a bottle. From a place no one believed existed. They brought me pine bark and warm moss. She curled around me when I cried. She wasn't scary. She made the wind quiet. His vision blurred. He turned another page. One night she sang, not a song like Mom sings, a song from the belly. The whole woods got still. I wasn't cold anymore. He couldn't breathe right. The ground seemed to rise beneath him, then fall away again. He held the book like it might vanish. Like maybe this was what insanity looked like from the inside. Then came the drawing. Crayon. Smeared. A giant figure beside a small girl, with a fire between them. The stars above were dots. The trees were just green triangles, but the face had eyes, 2 amber circles, and a long curved scar across one shoulder. Ray dropped the notebook and staggered back. It was her, the one he saw, the one in the woods, the one who didn't run, the one who stood like a wall between him and the child's voice, the one with the sound that broke his heart open. She saved Lacey. She didn't take her. She saved her. His knees hit the ground again, mud soaked through the fabric. His fingers curled into fists around the damp earth. The forest didn't move. Even the wind held back. He opened to the last page. There were only a few words, scribbled unevenly. Daddy, don't hate her. I wasn't scared. I wasn't alone. His body folded forward. The sob came without warning. No sound at first. Just the tightening of a life unraveling in reverse. Then it cracked through his chest like ice breaking under pressure. 18 years of blame, of fury, of trap wires and night patrols and dried-out maps. Of Victor whispering monsters and revenge. 18 years of carrying a lie because the truth was too impossible to believe. Now the truth sat in his lap, and it hurt more than the lie ever did. He clutched the notebook to his chest and wept into the moss. Up above, the trees didn't judge him. They just stood. When he finally moved again, the sun had climbed high enough to cast light into the ravine. He crawled to the edge and scanned again, clearer now. There was movement. Subtle. Someone down there. A shape. He pulled out a flare and fired. The red smoke curled upward like a ribbon. Then he turned back toward his truck, the notebook still in his hands. Every step he took forward felt like crossing a threshold into a story he hadn't known he was part of. At the ranger station, no one questioned his urgency. A team was assembled within minutes. Rescue ropes, stretchers, thermal blankets. Ray stood back, saying nothing, just pointing. The pages stayed inside his coat. He didn't show them yet. Didn't tell them what he'd found. Some truths were too raw to speak under fluorescent lights. It wasn't until hours later, when Hannah was airlifted up with a cracked femur and low body temp, that Ray allowed himself to breathe. She clutched something small in her hand. Tufts of dry pine needles. Not random. Placed. Tucked. He asked her one question. Was someone with you? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes searched his face like she was trying to read something beneath it. Then she nodded. Not someone, she whispered. Some ones. His chest pulled tight again. That night, back in his cabin, he placed the notebook on the table. The table where Lacey had once drawn with crayons and chewed her pancakes too loudly. He lit a candle, not for light, but because it felt right. The last page faced up. Daddy, don't hate her. I wasn't scared. I wasn't alone. The fire in the wood stove cracked once, sharp and sudden. He sat back and stared at the wall. There was a photograph pinned there. Faded. Lacey in a sundress, one tooth missing, grinning at the world like it had never hurt her. He spoke aloud for the first time in hours. "I'm sorry, baby girl." The wind outside picked up. Something shifted in the way the house creaked. Not like settling, more like sighing. The mountain kept its silence. But Ray had begun to remember what it meant to listen. And in that silence, something changed, because now he knew. She hadn't disappeared. She had been seen, held, protected, and maybe, just maybe, she'd been loved. The rain had stopped sometime in the early morning, leaving the forest dripping and hushed, every branch bowed with weight, every sound dampened like breath behind glass. Fog clung low across the ravine, swirling soft around stone and root, as if the mountain itself didn't want to let go of the girl still lying there. Hannah's body was curled like a comma in the shadow of the cliff wall, lips pale, lashes rimmed in frost. Her jacket was stiff at the seams. Her pulse, slow, stubborn, barely whispered against her neck. Ray's boots slammed into the wet soil as he anchored the final coil of rope to the hitch on his truck. He didn't wait for the others. Didn't speak. Didn't hesitate. His eyes had the kind of focus that comes when a man stops thinking about failure, because failure is no longer an option. The harness cinched tight across his ribs. His hands gripped the rope like it owed him something. He descended with the careful weight of a man twice betrayed. First by the world, then by his own belief. The earth narrowed around him as he dropped, trees shifting above like giants watching a funeral. The rope creaked. Mud bled from the cliff face. 30 feet. 20. 10. Then his boots found purchase, and there she was. Still, not alone. She wasn't supposed to be alone. He froze. 10 feet to her right, a massive figure stood at the mouth of a hollow between two stones, half shrouded in shadow, half bathed in the faint sheen of mist. Upright, broad, fur slicked from rain. Not fleeing, not attacking, waiting, watching. Ray's breath hitched as recognition bloomed sharp behind his ribs. The scar across her shoulder caught the light, and something inside him collapsed again, this time without pain. She had stayed. She had kept the girl warm. She had protected her. Marlow didn't move. Ray stepped forward, slow, one hand open, the other still resting near his hip. Not reaching for a weapon, reaching for the moment. The girl stirred first. Her eyes fluttered, pupils searching, then locking on him. "Ray?" Her voice cracked like dry grass. "You came." "I got you," he said, voice rough and barely above a whisper. "I've got you now." He knelt, checked her leg, grimaced at the angle. Bad break, blood on her sleeve. But she was alive. Alive. Behind him, the creature shifted, just slightly. Ray turned and nodded. That was all. That was enough. Together, he and Marlow moved. He braced Hannah's leg, wrapped her shoulder in the thermal blanket from his pack. Marlow stood nearby, silent as myth, her breathing deep, steady, like an anchor for the cold air around them. He clipped Hannah into the harness. She winced as it lifted. Then a sound tore through the woods like a rusted engine. Rough, sudden, too human to be natural, too cold to be anything but calculated. "Victor," his voice hit first. "Don't move." Ray turned just in time to see the man step from the tree line, rifle leveled, breath fogging in short, sharp bursts. Victor's eyes were wide and gleaming with something bitter. Satisfaction, or maybe madness. "Step aside," he growled. Ray didn't. Victor took another step, boots crunching wet gravel. "I warned you," he hissed. "All these years, and you still don't listen. It took your daughter then. Now it's taking another." "No," Ray said, low and even. "You were wrong." Victor raised the rifle higher. "It took her, Ray." Ray didn't blink. He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out the notebook. The same tattered, water-stained journal he'd held like scripture for the past day. "She wrote this." Victor laughed. Ugly, guttural. Kids write all kinds of make-believe. She didn't imagine the scar. Ray. She drew the fire, the moss. She called her kind. She begged me not to hate her. Victor's jaw clenched. Ray stepped forward. She wasn't stolen. She was saved. Victor shook his head, raising the barrel again. You're pathetic. You think that thing's a savior? It didn't kill her. You don't know that. I know you led me away that day. Victor flinched. Ray's voice dropped. I know you said you saw a track downriver. I know you made sure I never looked in the right place. I know why. Silence. Only the drip of water from the leaves. Only the ache of something ancient cracking wide. Victor's face twisted. It was supposed to be easy, a clean shot. The male was exposed. I was trying to help you. If we killed one, the others would run. You didn't kill the male, Ray said. You collapsed the bluff. You started the landslide. You buried my daughter's trail. Victor stepped back. You didn't lose her, Ray whispered. You buried her. The rifle wavered. Then the forest moved. Not wind, not birds. The creature stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Marlow. She didn't run. Didn't roar. She moved between Ray and Victor, lifting her head, shoulders squared, eyes burning amber in the mist. Victor froze. He raised the gun again. Ray stepped between them. The world held its breath. She's not here to hurt us, Ray said. Not to Victor, but to something larger. She's the only one who didn't. Victor snarled. You've lost your mind. Maybe, or maybe I just found it. Ray turned. Marlow stood still. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand. It hovered in the air like a peace offering, broad palm open, fingers curved gently. Not a threat, not a gesture of dominance. A connection. Ray looked at her. Really looked. Then he reached up, and without flinching, placed his hand against hers, palm to palm. The size difference was striking, his calloused fingers barely reaching halfway across hers. But the silence that followed felt like truth. Victor lowered his gun, but his hands shook. His face had lost all color. You're insane, he spat. Then he turned and vanished into the trees. The others arrived minutes later, rangers, EMTs, stretchers in tow. Ray didn't explain. He just stood, watching Marlow watch them. She didn't flee. She waited, watched, until Hannah was lifted clear, her hand briefly brushing Marlow's fur. Then she turned and slipped back into the trees. No crash of branches, no trail of footprints, only the memory of something that refused to be monster or myth. That night in the cabin, Ray sat alone. The fire crackled low. He held the notebook again, fingers grazing the page. Daddy, don't hate her. I wasn't scared. I wasn't alone. He closed his eyes. The warmth of her hand still pressed against his chest, even now. A gesture, a promise, or maybe, after all these years, a kind of forgiveness. And the mountain just beyond the window stood quiet, watching, waiting, always remembering. The road into Pine Hollow wound like a regret, long, cracked, and half swallowed by moss and silence. The rain had moved east, but the weight it left behind still lingered in the bones of the town. Ray drove slow, headlights off though the dusk was coming fast. He didn't need light to see this place. Every corner, every tree, every sway of power line carried the same echo of a truth he'd ignored for too long. The girl was safe. The journal was real. The monster wasn't a monster. But the worst part, the rot, was rooted right here, in the town itself. At the ranger station, Hannah lay curled in a thin wool blanket, a temporary cast wrapped around her thigh. Her cheeks were pale but no longer hollow. A thermos of soup sat beside her untouched. She stared at the wall like it had something to say. Ray stepped in and didn't say her name. She looked up anyway. You were right, he said quietly. Her throat tightened. He sat beside her. The chair creaked. Outside, a crow landed on the roof and stayed. I didn't think she was real, Hannah said. She was. I didn't think she'd be kind. She was. They didn't speak for a while. Then she whispered, I think she saved me. But not just from the cold. Ray's voice barely rose above the ticking clock. She saved my daughter once. I just didn't believe her. Later that night, Hannah slept. Ray didn't. He left her a note and stepped back into the dark. The cafe was still open. Mabel Turner had run it since Reagan was president, and the linoleum floors hadn't been changed since. She looked up from the register when the bell over the door rang. "Ray," she said, "Lord, haven't seen you in a while. I need to ask you something." She poured coffee without asking. He sat at the counter. Steam curled up between them. "You remember 1974, he said. She flinched, like he'd cracked something soft inside her. "Of course I do. You told folks you saw something near the edge of the trail that day." She looked down at her hands. "I did. Describe it again." Her lips parted, but no sound came for a moment. Then, it was tall. Not like a man, not like a bear. I saw it from across the ravine. It wasn't running. It was just watching. "Did it have a scar?" Mabel looked up. Her eyes widened. "On its shoulder?" "Yes." She nodded. Slowly. I always thought I dreamed that part. Figured my mind filled in details it couldn't understand. Ray pulled the notebook from his coat. Set it gently on the counter. She didn't touch it. But she stared, and her eyes filled. "I used to think maybe she wasn't really gone," Mabel whispered. "Maybe the forest took her in." Ray couldn't speak for a while. He just breathed. The whole place smelled like burnt coffee and memory. By morning, he was outside the old ranger's house. Glenn Morse opened the screen door with a cough and a scowl. "Didn't expect you," Glenn said. "Hell, didn't expect anything before 9. Ray held out the notebook. Glenn took it, and something in his shoulders slumped. "I remember this," he muttered. "We never found it. You were the one who called off the last sweep." Glenn didn't answer. "You remember why?" Glenn's voice cracked. "Victor said it wasn't worth the risk." Ray stared at him. "He knew. He led you the wrong way," Glenn said quietly. "I think he always wanted the kill." Ray closed his eyes. Then Glenn added, "You should also know, he made money off that pelt, the one from 74, the one he swore was bear." Ray opened his eyes slowly. "Bear hide doesn't have silver hair and opposable thumbs." Glenn nodded. The sky turned gray again. By the time Ray reached his porch that night, the wind had picked up. He sat in front of the wooden statue he'd carved of Lacey 2 winters after she vanished. Her smile frozen in cedar. Her hand outstretched, waiting for something to hold. A red bird landed on the railing and chirped once, sharp and clean. "I'm sorry, baby girl," Ray whispered. The air thickened. The trees didn't sway. They just stood, waiting. He stood up, walked inside. Victor was waiting, sitting at the kitchen table like he owned it. Ray didn't flinch. "You've been sniffing around," Victor said. "I should have started years ago." Victor leaned back. "This crusade of yours, it'll blow over." "No, it won't. I did what had to be done. I tried to end it before they spread." "They were a family," Ray said. "You broke them." Victor slammed his hand on the table. "They're not people." Ray stared at him. "But we are. And we forgot how to act like it." Victor stood up. "You're gonna get yourself killed out there protecting monsters." Ray took a step forward. "Better than living like one." Victor sneered and walked past him, out the door, into the cold. Ray didn't stop him, but something in the trees watched him go. The next day, Ray tracked him. Victor had gone deeper into the woods, past the old quarry road, into the places where even maps gave up. Ray followed. He saw the traps first. Wire snares, meat laced with poison, a trail of gas and tar. Victor wasn't hunting. He was planning something worse. Ray crouched low beside a tree, breath caught in his throat. And then he heard it. "Willow!" The cry was soft, distant, but unmistakable. Victor wanted the child. To sell, to display, to prove he was right all along. Ray turned back toward town, fast, feet pounding the dirt, heart catching in his chest. At home, he lit the stove and sat beside Lacey's statue. His voice cracked in the stillness. "Bojansai konoi." Outside, the trees whispered nothing, but the mountain knew. And the story wasn't finished yet. The trail was slick with melting frost, and the light breaking through the canopy felt thinner than usual, like the sun itself was holding its breath. The morning after Ray confronted Victor's traps, the silence in the trees had a different weight. Not the emptiness of solitude, the tension of watching, of waiting. Hannah knew she shouldn't be on her feet yet. Her ribs still ached when she moved too fast, and the bruises on her leg bloomed deeper shades of purple by the hour. But some things didn't wait for healing. Some debts demanded to be answered standing up. Ray didn't argue when she showed up on his porch, backpack slung over one shoulder, a makeshift brace on her thigh. "I know I shouldn't," she said, "but I have to warn her." He only nodded. They moved quietly, the forest folding around them like it was remembering. Ray carried a crowbar and a small hatchet. Not to fight, to free. Hannah kept her voice low, her boots careful, her breath clouded in the morning air. But she didn't complain once. The deeper they went, the more the woods changed. It wasn't obvious. Just a shift in rhythm. Less underbrush, fewer birds. A path only those who had come here before could feel. Ray stopped suddenly. There, ahead, a shape stepped out from behind a cedar. Willow. The young one stood half hidden by shadow, chest rising quick with breath. Not in fear, in something closer to hope. He stared at Hannah for a long second, then stepped forward. Slow, deliberate. He held something, a tuft of golden fur, soft and shining in the morning light. Willow offered it with both hands, palms up, like a sacred thing. Hannah crouched carefully, her knee flaring, and took it. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Ray's eyes softened. He'd seen many things in his life, but never a Bigfoot child offering trust. And then he noticed it, a patch of lighter fur across Willow's brow. Yellow gold, like a flame had touched him once and left a mark. Ray's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen that color before, in Lacey's hair. He didn't speak the thought aloud. Some things you just carry. Willow stepped back and let out a soft sound, a chuff-like wind through dry grass. And then Marlow appeared. She moved with the weight of someone who had seen too much and still chose to protect. Her body was broader than before, her movements slower. Ray watched her carefully. Hannah did too, and she saw it first. The way Marlow's steps were deliberate, the way she kept one hand on her lower belly, the subtle swelling below the ribs, the softness in her gait. Marlow was pregnant. Hannah's breath hitched. She looked at Ray. He saw it too. They were out of time. Marlow tilted her head toward Willow, who chirped again and started toward the ferns behind them. He tugged at something, bent, then let out a sharp, desperate cry. Ray's blood went cold. Willow was stuck. A wire snare, buried just below the pine needles, wrapped around the child's leg. A cruel loop of steel teeth meant to hold and maim. His scream rose into the trees, ragged and high, half human in its grief. Ray sprinted forward. Hannah limped after. The snare had pulled tight. Willow thrashed, his small body convulsing in terror. Blood trickled into the moss. Ray dropped to his knees. "Hold still," he whispered, though he knew Willow couldn't understand the words. But maybe he understood the tone. Willow whimpered. His fingers dug into the soil. Ray pulled out his pocket knife. It was old and dull at the tip, but it would have to do. He wedged it under the snare, cutting at the twist where the wire met the anchor point. Hannah dropped beside them, unwrapping a scarf from her pack, pressing it beneath Willow's leg to slow the bleeding. "I've got you," she whispered. Marlow hadn't moved. She stood just behind them, shoulders trembling, eyes fixed on her child. Her breathing was deeper now, almost strained. Ray slashed again. The wire snapped. Willow cried out and collapsed against Hannah's chest. The air shifted. Ray stood, heart pounding, and turned his head toward the ridgeline. Something gleamed. The glass of a scope. Far off, just a flicker. Victor. He knew where they were. Ray grabbed Hannah's shoulder. "He's watching." She looked up. Her hands still cradled Willow. Marlow moved forward and scooped her child into her arms. Her body tensed with pain, but she didn't let it show. Willow clung to her neck, trembling. Ray scanned the treetops, the rocks, the wind. The smell of gasoline still lingered from where Victor had baited the traps. And if he had a line of sight now, he had a plan for later. They had to move. Ray turned to Marlow. "We have to go," he said. She looked at him, not like an animal, like a mother. Then she nodded. They walked together, not as strangers anymore, but as something messier, something bound by injury and trust and shared terror. Hannah kept close, her steps dragging, but she didn't ask to stop. When they reached the ravine where it had all begun, the wind shifted again. Willow whimpered. Marlow set him down, gently, letting him lean against a tree. He was breathing better now. The bleeding had slowed, but something in the air made Ray's stomach twist. He turned again toward the tree line, and there, just at the edge, a shape, too still to be forest, too far to stop. A scope gleamed again, then vanished. Victor was close. Marlow's shoulders pulled back. She moved between Willow and the open woods. Ray saw it in her body, the instinct, the readiness. Even wounded, even pregnant, she would fight if she had to. Ray didn't want it to come to that. "We have to get him out of here," Hannah said. Ray nodded. He crouched beside Willow, lifting the young one slowly, cradling his weight. Willow didn't struggle. His breath was warm against Ray's neck. The woods didn't make a sound. Not yet. But the wind was shifting again, and Ray knew the storm was near. As they crossed into the thicker part of the woods, Ray looked back once. Marlow was still standing there, watching the trees, watching the place where the bullet might come from. And the mountain, somewhere above them, kept its breath steady. But beneath it, the hunt had begun to move. The forest didn't wake up that morning. It braced. Even the wind moved quieter than usual, slipping through the pine needles without song. Somewhere near the edge of Pine Hollow, where the creek curved like a question no one wanted to answer, Victor Lorne loaded his rifle with the same precision he used when skinning truth off a lie. His truck door slammed with a finality that startled the birds. But none flew. They just crouched lower into their nests, like they knew what was coming. He wasn't alone. Behind him, 4 men followed, their faces tired and eager in equal measure. Local hunters, some paid, some loyal, some just curious. They carried traps, ropes, a net that looked like it once belonged to a traveling zoo. One of them brought dogs, half-starved hounds trained to bark at anything bigger than a bear. Victor didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His eyes were enough. They said what his lips wouldn't. This time, no mistakes. Back at the edge of the timberline, Hannah tightened the straps on her brace and checked the blade she kept clipped inside her boot. She wasn't sure what she'd do with it. Only that she'd rather carry it than feel helpless again. Ray watched the trees. His hand never left the hatchet looped through his belt. The snare marks were still on his palms from yesterday. He hadn't spoken since dawn. Marlow and Willow stood between them and the deeper forest, half shielded by fern and mist. Willow's leg was bandaged with gauze and strips of Hannah's old flannel. He didn't make a sound, just leaned into Marlow's side like a child too tired to cry. Then the dogs howled, far off. But coming, Marlow flinched. Ray stepped in front of her. Hannah followed, taking position beside him. And for the first time since this whole thing began, the line between people and forest blurred. Victor's voice cracked through the branches like a gunshot. "You're hiding them, Ray. You think I don't know?" Ray didn't answer. "You think they're your family now," Victor shouted again. "You always were pathetic, living in the past, worshipping ghosts." Ray stepped forward, not far, just enough to make himself seen. "They're not ghosts," he called back. "They're better than anything you've got coming with you." The woods behind Victor moved. Men shifted. The hounds tugged at their leashes. One of the hunters muttered, "This ain't what I signed up for." Victor raised his rifle. Ray saw it a second too late. He turned just in time to shove Hannah down and take the edge of the shot across his shoulder. The crack of the bullet echoed. Pain lanced through him. He dropped to one knee. Then Marlow moved. She didn't roar. She ran, straight through the ferns, past Hannah, across the open break in the trees. She threw her body in front of them as another shot cracked and buried itself in the dirt. Victor cursed. One of the hunters screamed, "You're out of your mind." But Marlow didn't stop. She stood between her child and the men with guns. Her chest heaved. Her breath came like thunder under skin. Her body, already strained with the weight of carrying new life, held ground like stone, and something in the men began to crack. One of them, a bearded man with mud-stained jeans, lowered his rifle. His name was Caleb. Years ago, he'd hunted side by side with Ray during bad winters. Now his voice trembled. "She's not attacking," he said. "She's protecting." Victor spat on the ground. "They're animals." "No," Caleb said, stepping forward. "You are." Another man dropped his net. Victor wheeled on him. "You think they'll spare you? You think they're gonna sing lullabies to your kids?" Ray stood again, his arm bleeding through the shoulder. "She's already saved more lives than you ever will." Victor's face twisted. The hounds barked louder, but their handlers didn't release them. The group, once sure, once full of righteous hunt, fractured. And in the middle of it all, Willow limped to his mother's side. He looked smaller than ever, but his hands were steady as he reached up and touched Marlow's arm. Then he turned and looked at Victor. No words, no sound, just that stare. Victor raised the gun again. Ray didn't hesitate. He lunged, pain shooting through his ribs, and swung the hatchet down on the trap line tangled near Victor's feet. The metal snapped. A chain whipped around and tangled in Victor's legs. He fell backward hard, the rifle skidding from his hand. The forest didn't cheer, but it breathed. The rangers arrived moments later, breathless and wide-eyed. One of them carried the warrant Ray had quietly requested the day before. Another had a folder full of evidence. Photographs of Victor's traps, statements from Caleb, Mabel, Glenn, even the old logbooks. Victor didn't fight. He only stared at Ray as they cuffed him. "You chose them," he growled. Ray looked down. "I chose the truth." As Victor was led away, one of the dogs broke free and trotted up to Willow. The Bigfoot child didn't flinch. The dog sat at his feet, tail thumping once. Then again, Ray's voice cracked. "Let's get him out of here." They walked back toward the clearing together. Ray with his arm wrapped in gauze, Hannah limping beside him, and Marlow moving slowly behind them, one hand on her belly, the other resting gently on her child's shoulder. The light was different now, softer, less afraid. When they reached the stone outcrop above the creek, Marlow stopped. She turned to Ray, and with a slowness that felt deliberate, she dropped to one knee. Her head bowed slightly. Then she lifted her hand and placed it flat against his chest. The exact same gesture from the ravine, the same pressure, the same silence. Only this time it wasn't for forgiveness. It was gratitude. And Ray, for the first time in his life, had no more to say, because everything had already been spoken between them, not in words, but in what was given back. 3 autumns had passed since the last gunshot echoed through Pine Hollow, and in that time, the forest had begun to forget the sound of fear. Leaves turned slower now. Even the wind seemed gentler, curling through the trees with something like reverence. No one called it magic. But something had shifted, quietly, steadily, the way mountains change when no one's watching. Just past the second ridge, where the old Coldwater Creek trail used to vanish into a thicket of bramble and broken branches, there now stood a wooden archway, carved by hand. Thick cedar beams, sanded smooth, sealed with linseed oil. A small burnished plaque hung beneath it, nailed in with careful precision. It read, "Keaton Sanctuary for Forest Beings Established, 1995. Ray stood beneath it, thumb brushing the edge of the sign. He wore the same flannel jacket he always had, though the elbows had been patched and the collar re-stitched. His beard had gone mostly silver. The scar from Victor's bullet was a faint ridge under his shirt. No longer angry, but never forgotten. To his right, a wire fence lined with bells rattled gently in the breeze. They weren't meant to keep anything in or out. just to sing when something passed by. A way to say, I see you and you see me. The sanctuary wasn't big. 35 acres, all protected by grant money and a stack of permits that took 2 years to win over the county board. But it was enough. Enough space for those who needed quiet. Enough space for something to live without hiding. Hannah had returned that spring. She'd left her university fellowship and the lined halls of fluorescent-lit labs to come back and build what the textbooks couldn't explain. Her small cabin sat just beyond the lower trail loop, shaded by sugar maples and built from reclaimed pine. Some nights she wrote research. Some nights she just sat on the porch and listened. Today she stood with a clipboard and a soft smile, watching a group of third graders from Pine Hollow Elementary whisper their way through the main footpath. A guide pointed out scat samples, bird song, a knotted sapling shaped like a bent knee. No mention of creatures, no promises, just the woods and the way they carried stories in their shadows. Ray wandered past her with 2 buckets of cracked corn, one for the deer, one for the turkeys. And maybe, if she was near, the mother of the forest would accept an offering too. He set the buckets down by the tree line and whistled once, low and steady. Branches shifted, and from the brush, a familiar shape emerged. Marlow. Taller now, or maybe the trees just leaned when she moved. Her fur was thick, autumn brown, with hints of gray around the edges. Her eyes, still amber, held something softer than wariness now. Recognition. Understanding. She blinked slowly as Ray stepped back. Then, behind her came motion. Not 1, not 2, 4. 4 little ones. The smallest had fur the color of ash and curled against her mother's hip. The tallest bore that same gold patch on the brow, just like Willow, who now moved with confidence and the lanky awkwardness of adolescence. Ray's chest filled. He didn't speak. He just watched as Marlow nudged the little ones forward, letting them sniff the buckets, taste the cracked corn, listen to the bells without fear. Willow stayed near his mother's side, scanning the clearing, his breath fogging in small bursts. Hannah stepped up beside Ray. She didn't carry her notebook today. She didn't need it. The moment was enough. Ray turned toward her. She trusts us. She always did, Hannah said. We just didn't listen. Time passed in small movements. A leaf fell. A bell chimed. A raven landed on the marker post and watched the children giggle as they tiptoed toward a sculpture at the entrance. Lacey's statue. Ray had carved it the winter after the sanctuary opened. Not as a grave, as a welcome. It stood just tall enough for a child to recognize. A girl in a simple dress, one hand reaching out, the other cradling a pine cone. A bronze plaque read, "Kindness returns, even after the longest winters." And it did. It returned in the shape of a boy who once thought monsters killed his sister. It returned in the girl who held a dying Bigfoot child like her own. It returned in the mother who protected what could not protect itself. Marlow stepped toward the statue that morning. She hadn't before. Not this close. She stood in front of it, shoulders rising and falling like slow waves. Then she reached out with one massive hand and gently, almost reverently, placed her palm against Lacey's outstretched fingers. The forest went still. Ray's eyes burned. The youngest of Marlow's brood, barely half Hannah's height, watched the gesture with wide, dark eyes, then toddled forward and did the same. Palm to bronze. Bronze to memory. Somewhere far off, the wind shifted again, later that evening, when the sun had dipped behind the mountain and shadows stretched long across the sanctuary. Ray sat on the overlooked bench, eyes scanning the treetops for movement he no longer feared. Behind him, the lights from the visitor station dimmed. The world exhaled. He heard a rustle, footsteps, light. He turned, expecting Hannah. It was Marlow, alone. She crossed the clearing slowly, each step measured. Her body had changed. Broader, yes, but something in the way she carried herself spoke of age. Not weakness, but knowing. She stood in front of him. They faced each other in the amber twilight. No barriers, no weapons. Then she lifted her hand and placed it flat against his chest. Again, not as goodbye, as something deeper. A gesture carved into time, a recognition. Ray closed his eyes. She held it there for a long moment. Then she stepped back, turned, and vanished into the trees, her silhouette swallowed not by darkness, but by belonging. He sat there until the stars came out. The bells along the trail barely stirred. From where he sat, he could see the shape of Hannah's cabin, lit warm by a single lantern. Inside she was writing. Not a study, not a thesis. A record, not for the world, for the ones who would someday need to believe. Down by the river, Willow played with his siblings, his laugh muffled by distance but clear in its cadence. Marlow watched from a rock nearby, her gaze sweeping the sanctuary like a sentry of something ancient and tender. The forest had grown quiet again, but not the silence of grief, the silence of peace, the kind that only comes after something is returned. Not just a child or a truth, but a kindness that had wandered far, gotten lost, and still found its way back. And up on the ridge, where the wind curled around the edge of the world and carried with it the scent of pine and something older than language, a shape watched. Maybe just the mountain, maybe something more. Either way, it did not speak. It didn't need to. Some stories live best in the hush that comes after forgiveness. Sometimes the deepest truths don't shout. They wait, quiet as snowfall, patient as old trees. They live in the spaces between what we believe and what we've forgotten how to feel. Not everything that walks in shadow is meant to be feared. Not every silence is empty. And not every goodbye means the story has ended. Some things, some kindnesses, take the long way home. There are places in this world where the rules of understanding bend, where the wild still holds its breath and remembers how to protect its own. And once in a rare while, if we're listening, not just with our ears, but with something older, softer, we might witness something we were never meant to see. Not because it was forbidden, but because it was sacred. This story wasn't about proof. It was never about winning an argument or drawing a clean line between fact and folklore. It was about learning to see again. Learning that family doesn't always look like we expect. That protection, in its purest form, isn't loud or prideful. It's quiet, instinctive. It stands in the cold without asking for thanks. Some wounds take years to heal. Some forgiveness comes long after the apology. But the forest has always known. What's given in kindness finds its way back. Maybe not in the way we imagine, maybe not on the path we plan, but it returns. Sometimes as a gesture, sometimes as a life, sometimes as the silence that finally lets us rest. We hope this story reminded you of something you already carried in your heart, that goodness is never wasted, that trust, once broken, can still grow back, that even the most unexpected bonds can change the course of everything. If this journey moved you, let us know where you're listening from. What did this story awaken in you? Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections. And if you believe, as we do, that some stories still matter, even the quiet ones, even the ones hidden in the trees, consider subscribing and joining our growing community. One built on wonder, compassion, and the simple truth that kindness always matters. Thank you for walking this path with us. We'll see you again in the forest.